Appreciate you coming down. My name's Dave Ditloff. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation. Want to list through, have a few comments, introductory comments here, and then we'll kick things off to the real fun. We've got a bunch of good speakers lined up, and looks like more are signing in as we speak. Co-sponsors. We got a lot of great co-sponsors for this meeting tonight. National Wildlife Federation, Sierra Club, Montana Conservation Voters, Climate Action Now Club, Montana Environmental Information Center, Montana Audubon, Montana Elders for a Livable Tomorrow, Northern Plains Resource Council, Conservation Hawks, and Transition Missoula. So I think that's a good group to be in here with all that set of folks. There is a sign-in sheet. If you missed it here, Peter, wave your hand. Pete's signing in, particularly if you want to speak. We're encouraging folks to speak. You can also sign postcards if you'd rather do it that way here. There's postcards. Pete's got some. There's some on the back table there as well. We actually have T-shirts. Those are free. Grab them. If you got somebody you think pretty confident that would wear them, grab them for those folks too. That's what they're for. As long as they're worn, we're willing to give them away here. We also have yard signs, or you can put them in windows on a table on that side as well. Same thing. Grab those. Those are for free. Maybe best of all here to this, we got some really generous donations. Bernice's Bakery donated a whole slew of cookies. The Good Food Store donated a whole slew of muffins. I guess Bernice's Bakery also gave us water for tea and some coffee, and we got some cold drinks there as well. So dig in. There's a lot there. Don't be shy. I know a lot of people are probably thirsty here on a hot day. Bathrooms are right out the door on the left if you need those. If everybody could turn off their cell phones, that would be great as well. Little bit about why we're here tonight. A month and a half ago, the Environmental Protection Agency released their Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan would reduce carbon emissions at power plants by 30% by 2030. And it would use 2005 numbers to do that. So states would get credit for stuff that we've already done here in the state. So here in Montana, because we've got a renewable energy portfolio and then we've done some other things here, that comes down to we'll probably need a 21% reduction here in Montana by 2030. And the way they've set it up, it's not regulating every smokestack, kind of a command and control system. It gives states flexibility to create what they call state implementation plans. So Missoula's own Tracy Stone Manning, who's the head of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, will be in charge of that. Real good hand. Have a lot of confidence in that process as well. And it gives her some flexibility to get her job done right, according to how it would work best for Montana, both reducing the carbon pollution, but doing it in a way that doesn't impact on the economy. We've got 7 or 8 kind of planned speakers here that will start things off. Should have some real good comments. I'm excited to listen to them. And then everybody after that, like I said, in the sign-in sheet, we'll just kind of go in order. We're asking folks to stay at around 3 minutes. Topher here, Topher, raise your hand. We'll kind of hold up a sheet at when you got 30 seconds left and when you're kind of done with the time. Looks like maybe we won't necessarily have a problem with time, but the library we're gonna have to close down at 8:30. The library wants us out by 8:45, so that's it's a quick disassembling of all the chairs and stuff. So that's the reason for the time limits, and we normally like people to go a little bit longer. Another thing is we do have a court reporter here. This is what we're calling a citizen hearing. There's actually going to be official hearings in Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Denver, not very close to us. So we've decided we'd do this as a citizen hearing, if you would. The court reporter will take things down if you get up and talk verbatim, so we'll be able to enter them, send them to the EPA, and have them become official comments to the Environmental Protection Agency's record on this rulemaking process. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We also have community access television here. Who will be airing it probably a couple times, I'm guessing, as well here. Sure appreciate both of them coming down today. Part of the court reporting process here is if you have even a remotely difficult name to spell, please spell the name. Just kind of, my name is such and such, and then spell your name so we have that right in the record here. I think everything else you can get right and spell right, but that's the hardest part, I think, is getting the names right. All right, well, I think we're ready to roll here with things. First speaker tonight is Dr. Ashley Ballantyne, a bioclimatologist at the University of Montana.
Good evening. I'd like to thank Dave Ditloff and the various organizers of this event. It's very timely and very, very important meeting to come together and really discuss these things. Because, you know, in some respects there seems to be a changing of consciousness, and we really need to take that momentum and turn it into legislation to regulate greenhouse gases. So I just wanted to give you a carbon climate context for this evening and point out some, you know, frightening statistics personally, but statistics that I work with every day. So we're currently emitting 9 billion tons of carbon a year from fossil fuels, and that's 90% of the emissions entering the atmosphere are from fossil fuels. So it's really driving the global carbon cycle at this point, and it's driving it in directions that it hasn't been driven in a long time. So we have recently passed an inauspicious milestone of 400 parts per million concentration of atmospheric CO2. And based on our estimates, the Earth has not experienced CO2 levels of 400 parts per million in the last 4 million years. So this is really, you know, unprecedented over historical records and over Earth's history. And over the last century, we've added about 100 parts per million CO2 to the atmosphere, and we're very confident as a scientific community that the addition of CO2 among other greenhouse gases has resulted in a direct warming of approximately 2 degrees Fahrenheit of Earth's atmosphere. Now, Earth's atmosphere hasn't warmed steadily over that period of time. It's really warmed in starts and fits, and it's that unsteady warming that actually is alarming, because it's not a linear process. We don't just add CO2 and get a warming out, but it's a very complex system that we're still trying to understand. Nonetheless, our theoretical understanding of the system suggests that the system is very sensitive to CO2, and we might expect with an additional doubling of CO2, maybe 2 to 3 degrees of additional warming to Earth's atmosphere. So what can we do as U.S. citizens? Well, we are making strides towards reducing emissions. Roughly, in 4 out of the last 6 years, emissions in the U.S. have gone down, which is reassuring. And we've accomplished this mainly through the decommissioning of old coal-fired power plants. And coal is the primary villain among fossil fuels. For every unit of coal you burn, you emit a lot more CO2 than if you were to burn natural gas or other fossil fuel sources. So coal is the villain, and decommissioning coal-fired power plants is probably the easiest way to reduce our emissions of CO2 in the U.S. However, we're also exporting emissions effectively. So although emissions have gone down in the U.S. for the last 6 years, that's mainly because we're exporting fossil fuels in the form of coal and importing cheap goods. So that's another important point to make here, is CO2 knows no political boundaries. We can regulate it at the state level or at the national level. However, the atmosphere is well mixed, and the atmosphere tells no lies, and the atmosphere tells us that that we've added enough CO2 to the system that we're able to measure global warming on a global scale without any doubt. And lastly, I just want to bring it home to Montana and, just part with some optimistic thoughts. And that is that Montana as a state has a tremendous capacity for renewable energy. Here in western Montana, we rely heavily on hydroelectric power, which is an excellent renewable energy source. We also have a huge amount of wind potential in eastern Montana that we do not currently harness. And we really need to work towards legislation to harness that energy and also remove obstacles in legislation for enhanced wind energy. And this could be supplemented with solar power. So I see no reason that Montana cannot be a state that's run purely on renewable energy in the near future. So I'm curious to see what other people have to say about this pressing problem. Thank you.
All right, I might stagger these here too. So our next speaker is State Senator Sue Malek. Appreciate it. On deck is Dr. Paul Smith as well, just as a heads up. So, Senator.
Thank you. Today I was organizing my home office. My husband calls it a storage shed. I call it an office. And from around that room, issues were calling out to me. Healthcare, particularly for low-income workers and women. Child abuse, poverty, homelessness, food deprivation. All these issues call out. And why does this issue rise to the top? Every day in Montana, we feel the temperatures rise. We look at our forests and see that the proliferation of the mountain pine beetle is turning our forests red. We try to breathe our air and we see that the atmosphere is filled with forest fire smoke. Recently, one of the more conservative leaders in the world, Pope Francis, said, environmental degradation is the moral imperative of our day. Secretary of State John Kerry called for worldwide attention to the desperate state of our oceans. Today we are here to support another leader. President Barack Obama ordered the EPA to generate carbon emission reduction standards. And ladies and gentlemen, those standards are here today, and they're already making a difference. Coal plants are closing across our nation. Corrette, the first and dirtiest coal plant in Montana, is gone. Northwestern Energy has a deal on the table to buy back the dams. Northwestern got that deal without including the buyback of coal strip from PP&L. This is a wonderful opportunity for Montana, and if you haven't written to your public service commissioners yet, and these commissioners, let me tell you, are not friends of renewables and are strong friends of coal, you need to write them and tell them to tell Northwestern Energy to buy back our dams. Montana utilities are close to meeting our 15% renewable energy standard. That's a good thing, but we need to elect the right people to the Montana legislature and lobby the legislature to increase that standard. Wind energy is already among the cheapest energy sources in Montana, definitely cheaper than coal. Solar and wind prices have dropped dramatically since 2008. Wind and solar are being developed around the world. I was surprised to read a recent Time magazine article. I don't know how many of you saw it. But China has pledged to generate 250 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2020. Saudi Arabia has invested $100 billion in a solar initiative. Today in the United States, we have as many wind and solar jobs as coal jobs, and we need to increase that number. We do need better incentives for distributed energy in Montana. But if you and I take advantage of the credits that are available today and put solar on our home and our business rooftops, we can be a leader in Montana in distributed energy. The new carbon emission standards are pushing Montana and our nation forward. We support a 30% reduction in carbon emissions in this state and across our nation, and we will do everything we can to make that happen. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get her done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The next speaker is Dr. Paul Smith. On deck is Todd Tanner.
Good evening. As he said, my name is Paul Smith. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist and have been practicing for over 25 years. And I'd like to comment on EPA's Clean Power Plan as it affects specifically children's health. Simply put, when deciding whether or not to support EPA's plan, our children's health shouldn't just be a consideration, really should be the priority. It's quite simply wrong to ask them to bear the burden of shortened lives and lesser quality of life in exchange for what we do to use more convenient and environmentally harmful energy sources when we can develop alternatives. While the plan specifically targets CO2 emissions, as CO2 goes, so go many other pollutants from coal burning. Limiting CO2 will limit exposure to and from those pollutants as well. Such toxins include particulate matter that we know increases lung and cardiovascular disease, and gases such as sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides. While this plan is in the future, I put these considerations in the present tense because we're already doing a poor job of managing children's health. Already, there are 72,000 schools and 35 million children living within 30 miles of coal-burning plants, where levels of these air pollutants are above national quality standards. At least 2 million of these children have asthma already, and that's not to mention diseases such as cystic fibrosis, premature lung disease, and heart disease. It's already clearly been shown that the rates and severity of asthma and respiratory tract infections is increased in these areas. And the rate of childhood asthma is increasing. Basically, it's doubled over the last 50 years. And it's important to remember we don't have a cure for asthma. You know, everybody thinks of it as a periodic attack that you have, when in fact many adults that have asthma started when they were children, and the disease is a chronic progression of scarring of the airways that worsens with time in many patients. I mentioned other pollutants that are affecting children from coal burning. Of great concern are heavy metals that contaminate the soil and the water. These include mercury, arsenic, beryllium, all of which are toxic to humans, especially to the developing fetus. We also know that exposure of mothers to inhaled particulate matter increases the incidence of premature births, and approximately 10% of infant mortality is secondary to the effects of breathing particulate matter. Some of these pollutants are directly deposited into the streams and rivers, contaminating our water supplies, while others are held in coal ash ponds. The EPA has identified over 600 such ponds, one of the largest of which is here in Montana at Coal Strip. This site covers over 600 acres, and the ponds leach more than 360 gallons of water of toxic effluent each minute into the surrounding groundwater. All of these health hazards are clear and present danger of toxins directly affecting children now. And I haven't even mentioned the effects of our children's health from climate change as CO2 accumulates from burning coal, the primary concern of this plan. Effects that are already being felt include increased numbers of high temperature days. Lives are lost to heat stress, and the very young and elderly are the most vulnerable. With higher temperatures come higher ozone levels, and ozone is known to be a toxin directly to the lung and worsens asthma. Longer, hotter, and drier summers are leading to forest fires of record proportion, as was already mentioned, that are worsening lung conditions and making it unsafe to even play outside. The list of climate change-driven health effects seems endless and includes such things as water and food shortages, increased waterborne diseases, increased vector-borne diseases such as encephalitis, malaria, and dengue fever. And our children are being affected disproportionately now and the risk of these diseases will worsen. So while the present and future of our children and their children should be sufficient justification to support the Clean Power Plan, children also serve as a bellwether for what happens to everyone's health. They breathe more air, they are contaminated for greater periods of time, they take in more water, and are exposed to toxins for a longer period of time during early development. Finally, the health injuries we're causing our children now will burden them for a life and accumulate with time. The greatest national debt we leave for them won't be a financial debt. It will be a health debt of shortened lives and decreased function. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Todd Tanner with Conservation Hawks is next. On deck is Dr. Diana Six.
Can everybody hear me out there? Because this is how loud we are, and this is how loud we need to be. Okay, we need to speak up. We need to get people's attention. We need to focus on this stuff. I usually speak extemporaneously, and I talk about this stuff a fair amount, and I talk for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, until people beg me to leave. And I thought I had a half an hour tonight, and Dave said no, 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do instead of my usual stick is just read the comments that I'm going to actually submit in D.C. next week. So my name is Todd Tanner. I live in Big Fork, Montana. I'm a sportsman, a hunter, and an angler, as well as a longtime outdoor writer and the president of Conservation Hawks. I'd like to take this opportunity to comment on the EPA's proposed Clean Power Plan. Here in America, nobody likes expensive, unnecessary regulations. Yet at the same time, the vast majority of us do support clean air and water, healthy landscapes, and a strong, robust economy. We also want to give our kids and grandkids the best possible shot at a prosperous future. And I'm going to take just a little break and say I have a 9-year-old boy, which is why I focus so hard on climate change. Unfortunately, climate change is beginning to slam the United States. In the West, we're seeing extreme heat, mega droughts, dying forests, and catastrophic wildfires. Back east, it's sea level rise and crazy storms and serious flooding and lots of hungry, disease-carrying ticks and mosquitoes. The science on climate change is clear and unequivocal. The fossil fuels we're burning are literally changing the chemistry of our atmosphere. They're acidifying our oceans, and they're warming our planet. If we're going to have any hope at all of defending our American way of life, we need to reduce our CO2 emissions dramatically and make an immediate shift to clean, renewable energy. With that in mind, I support the proposed EPA Clean Power Plan. We need to lower carbon emissions from existing power plants and kick our addiction to fossil fuels. It's the only way we're going to hold on to our hunting and fishing or give our kids and our grandkids a shot at a healthy, prosperous future. There's one final point I'd like to make tonight. These EPA regulations wouldn't be necessary if Congress was doing its job. Unfortunately, Congress has been missing in action on climate change, and that means we have to rely on the EPA to reduce carbon emissions from power plants and other major sources of pollution. The climate doves and climate deniers in Congress need to do their job. That means setting aside all the anti-science rhetoric and the partisan politics and defending America against the single largest threat we face. We have to address global warming, and we have to do it now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd. Dr. Diana Six is next. Professor at the University of Montana, entomologist here. Jan Holm with MELT is next.
Okay, thank you. And that is spelled S-I-X. Nobody ever believes that. That's your name? Anyway, good evening. I am a forest entomologist and pathologist, and that means that most of the time when I'm doing research, I'm working on insects and diseases that affect our forest trees. And you might be wondering, what does my work have to do with the Clean Power Plan? And the answer to that is actually quite a lot. Our forests are what they are because of the conditions under which they grow. And if you change those conditions, you change the forest. When you change the forest and you change forest trees, you're not only changing the structure, but you're changing the wildlife, you're changing all of the organisms, and very important for us, you're changing all of the ecosystem services. So that includes water, air quality, carbon sequestration, wood, and on and on. If climatic conditions change too drastically, many trees will no longer be able to survive in the areas where they occur now. Even with modest changes, forests will also become increasingly prone to disturbance by native insects and diseases, fire, and even to exotic invaders. A case in point is the mountain pine beetle, and that's an insect, of course, we're all really familiar with here in western Montana. Now, that insect is a native, and it's been probably developing outbreaks here for thousands and thousands of years. So it's actually a very natural part of our ecosystem. However, the most recent outbreak is a really good example of just how sensitive insects are to even slight changes in temperature and stress levels in our trees. Not only has the current outbreak been 10 times larger than any we've recorded in the past, the insect is actually expanding its range. It's moved hundreds of miles further north because it's now warm enough for the insect to exist there. In fact, as of last year, it had actually reached all the way to the Yukon, if you can imagine that. It's moved out of British Columbia in that area of expansion and has now moved clear across Alberta. And in Alberta, it's in a place where it's never been before. It's also in a tree species it's never been in before, which is jack pine. And so if you're in a new place and you're in a new tree species, that makes you an exotic. And it's expected to keep moving all the way through the jack pine boreal forest across the continent and into our eastern pine forests. Now, mountain pine beetle is not alone. It may be the most dramatic example that we've seen so far, but other massive tree die-offs are occurring around the world right now. As of now, there's been more than 80 documented massive tree die-offs that we can link directly to a changing climate. There's a lot more that are occurring, but they're so new and understudied that we can't attribute a cause. The southern pine beetle, if you're from the south, that's sort of the counterpart to our mountain pine beetle here in the west. It's moving north and is now invading eastern pine forests where it hasn't existed before. Mountain pine beetle here, it might be on the decline, but that doesn't mean we're, dare I say, out of the woods yet. Maybe we will be. There's a lot more insects out there in the forest that affect trees than just mountain pine beetle. There's a lot of them. And there's a lot more bark beetles. And we're starting to see increases of western pine beetle, Doug fir beetle. Colorado, which has been through utter hell with mountain pine beetle, is now seeing a massive outbreak of spruce beetle driven by prolonged drought. In western Montana, our forests are really our lives. We rely on them for water, for air, for livelihoods, recreation, and for many of us, me included, basically our well-being. It's a lot of the reason we live here. Do we want to pass on a Montana like the one we've been privileged to live in? Or do we want to pass on one that's going to be very, very different? What happens and what kind of Montana we pass on has everything to do with the decisions we make and the ones we make right now. Supporting the Clean Power Plan will be a very important and big step in reducing emissions and reducing and turning around some of the impacts that are happening to our forests and to Montana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Six. Up next is Jan Holm, and this is one of the tricky names. You might want to spell it for Jennifer here. And on deck is Steph Larson.
Hello, my name is Jan Hoem, H-O-E-M, and I'm with Montana Elders for a Livable Tomorrow. That's a group of people in my age group who our mission is to leave to future generations a more livable world than the one we're on a path to creating. So you can imagine how wonderful it is for this group, some of us, to be here tonight to participate in this historic moment. To see the United States poised to reduce carbon emissions by 30% below the 2005 levels, it is a very big deal. Thank you, EPA and Gina McCarthy. Some of you have heard what I'm going to say next, but it's especially appropriate for tonight. In the year 2000, on Earth Day, I was invited to speak to a group of high school seniors at Hellgate High School. In a packed auditorium, I showed my slides and told the story about climate change, global warming. And when I was done, I was asked for questions, and a young man in the back of the room raised his hand and asked, if global warming is so serious, why hasn't your generation done something about it? That was in the year 2000. I hesitated, and then I said, well, a lot of the evidence is fairly new. But if 10 years from now we haven't done something major, then shame on us. Well, 2010 came and left, and now that young man is somewhere around 32 years old. It's 14 years later, and look what's on the table, at last. Here is our opportunity to take the first big step with the Clean Power Plan. It will encourage growth in the renewable energy industry and in conservation, creating more jobs than the coal industry can today. It will begin to clean up our air and water and show this country is ready to lead to a better form of power to lead the nation and the world. I'm not entirely jubilant tonight. There is an undercurrent of unease for me as I look at the need to act decisively and soon. The Methow Valley in north central Washington state is experiencing its greatest wildfire in recorded history, with over 390,000 square miles burned. Just a minute. Harold and I lived in that area for many years. Harold and a friend built our home. It was 16 by 28 feet, tucked into a beautiful wooded area above a stream. That place was burned to the ground last week by a wall of fire pushed by 40-mile-an-hour winds. Close to 200 homes have burned. People we know there say it's like the apocalypse. We are thinking of them tonight. These kinds of events are happening more frequently and with greater intensity around the nation and the world. This trend is related to the additional heat energy stored in our atmosphere, and the greatest source of this is unquestionably coal-fired power plants. Reducing carbon emissions ultimately to a much lower level than the Clean Power Plan aims for is the most important thing we can do to try to return some equilibrium to the planet with cleaner air and water and better health for future generations. I have 30 seconds. So let's give the Clean Power Plan our support and get things moving. Thank you.
Great, Jan. Next speaker is Steph Larson. On deck is Caitlin. I'm going to butcher your name. Piserchia. So, thanks.
Hi, my name is Steph Larson. I'm the senior policy organizer at the Center for Rural Affairs at our office here in Montana. For over 40 years, the Center for Rural Affairs has worked to establish strong rural communities and engage people in decisions that affect the quality of their lives and the future of their communities. And I'm here today to offer my and our support for the EPA's actions to address climate change. Now, before you raise your eyebrows at the word rural, let me say that small towns are not a homogeneous block, and we don't all follow the stereotypes that everyone has come to know. Every day, my work gives us a seat at the table in small towns across America. We are a national organization. This is where we hear about the good and the bad, the stories of hope and triumph, and taking a stand in rural communities. We hear from leaders that make our rural communities strong. Stories from people like Wally Congdon, who has a ranch near Drummond, where he does his best to limit his own carbon footprint by keeping vehicles older than I am in working order. If he were here today, he would tell you very emphatically, in fact, that if you take a functional car and you trade it in for one with better gas mileage, that you have a 14,000 gallon gas deficit. So all of his cars were built earlier than 1975. He also stocks Scottish Highland cows, 2 of which are mine, and he needs to get them to me. No, that make good use of the weeds and grass alike. Wally doesn't have an email address because computers run on carbon-based energy he'd rather not use. Or Jason Moore, a co-op manager in Polson. Jason's doing his best to create a thriving local food system in western Montana, not only because the food tastes better, but also because fewer miles traveled for every tomato, and every pound of synthetic fertilizer that isn't used because his family's farm grows organically means less carbon in the atmosphere. It's not just farmers who are concerned. In southeast Colorado, where I was recently, I hear from extension agents who tell me that entire towns have been vacated, their agricultural-based economies completely wiped out by the lengthy drought there. The small business owners who serve the town, the teachers and healthcare providers and grocers that made those towns vibrant have all had to leave too. As a producer myself, I am presented every day with the challenges that climate change poses to Montana's infrastructure and natural resource health. I bought a farm this year in St. Ignatius, and as I think about what I'm going to grow, I also have to face the fact that unpredictable spring weather means that my fruit trees have been blooming too early, only to get wiped out by a later frost. Farmers and ranchers depend on predictability within a certain degree, and climate change has already cost us billions every year in disaster relief, in lost crops, raging fires, and dead animals. We can't afford to simply adapt to severe flooding and extreme weather year after year. The Center for Rural Affairs doesn't claim to speak for everybody, but the relationships we've built over the last 4 decades reminds us that stewardship is still strong in rural America. That's why we have over the past few weeks, almost 600 Friends of Rural America have signed our petition in support of the carbon pollution standards we're discussing today, and we're just getting started. Farmers and rural people can and will adapt. Double cropping and triple cropping, seed modification, crop switching, and other adaptive practices are all on the table. Clean energy and efficiency present an exciting opportunity for economic development. But you can only hear so much from grain farmers like Arlen Shipper, who believe that the biggest issue with our climate right now is that folks would rather keep their heads in the soil than be aware of this dangerous path that we're on. The rule isn't perfect, it won't solve all of our problems, and it probably doesn't even go far enough. But action is needed now, and it's better to speak up and make the rule better than do nothing and see farms like mine and Jason's and Wally's take dramatic economic hits. Climate change isn't something we can ignore. Now is the time to face the problems head on, and I thank EPA for doing just that.
Thank you, Steph. Caitlin's not feeling well here, so we'll skip on to Claudia Narcisco is up next, and then on deck is Harold Holm.
My name is Claudia Narcisco, and I'm testifying as a volunteer on behalf of the Montana chapter of the Sierra Club and our 3,200 members statewide, and for Jonathan Matthews, who prepared this statement. He's the chair of the Energy Committee for the chapter. The Montana chapter of the Sierra Club strongly supports the proposed rule that requires states to reduce their carbon emissions by 30% from 2005 levels by 2030. This reasonable rule allows states the flexibility in how to reduce their carbon emissions. States can increase energy efficiency, use renewable energy sources, make improvements to coal-fired power plants, or convert coal plants to natural gas. All choices which would create good jobs. Many states will probably focus on reducing emissions from power plants, which emit 40% of our country's carbon pollution. As coal strip is one of the highest single-source emitters of carbon dioxide in the country, our members are optimistic that in addressing this source, our state can make a large contribution to reducing the carbon emissions of our nation. Because coal has higher carbon content per unit of power than other energy sources, the proposed EPA rule would cause states to reduce the use of coal for power generation. The proposed EPA rule would also have the significant public health benefits of reducing pollution from sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, which contribute significantly to respiratory disease. Additionally, cutting back on coal would eliminate many tons of mercury and other harmful heavy metals from polluting our air. It is important to point out that reducing carbon emissions by 30% is not as ambitious as it may initially appear. Carbon emissions in the United States have already fallen 10% from 2005 levels. So the proposed rule requires only a further 20% reduction over the next 16 years. Given current trends, this reduction amount is clearly attainable. As the climate change situation is grave, we hope that the implementation of the proposed rule will lead to even greater reductions in carbon emissions than the rule mandates. The first 13 years of the 21st century were among the 14 hottest on record. In 1960, the peak seasonal CO2 concentration at NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory Station was below 320 parts per million. Last month, the CO2 concentration on Mauna Loa was 401 parts per million. The average CO2 level has risen steadily since 1960. Over the last 10,000 years, the average CO2 levels, as observed in Antarctic ice core samples, have been well below 300 parts per million. Climate scientists estimate we need to get CO2 levels below 350 parts per million to avoid calamitous climate change that tips out of control and creates a runaway feedback loop with no hope of arresting it. Clearly, we are in a crisis situation that demands bold, effective actions. The proposed EPA rule is a modest step in tackling a problem that will likely be the most difficult encountered this century. Therefore, the thousands of members and supporters of the Montana chapter of the Sierra Club support the implementation of the proposed rule that would require states to reduce their carbon emissions by 30% of their 2005 outputs by the year 2030. Thank you.
Up next is Harold Holm. On deck is Hank Stein. Just a reminder here, we've got drinks over here. We've got tea and coffee and soft drinks, cookies from Bernice's Bakery, muffins from the Good Food Store. Dig in here. There's a lot left, so appreciate it. Harold, you're up.
Thanks. My name's Harold Hoem, H-O-E-M, husband of Jan Hoem. I think the single biggest thing that I'm feeling tonight is a real sense of hope, because we've been following this issue since the 1990s, late 1990s, when we first became aware of climate change problems. And, you know, we've come a long way, believe me. You can't look at a newspaper today without seeing something about the climate. And that was not the case 15 years ago. I look at, my father was born in 1900, so it's real easy for me to peg this. Here's my father's lifespan, and here's my lifespan, and we've eaten up an entire century plus. And what's that going to look like into the future? We're talking about 2030 changes. Well, I'm probably going to have to get an extended lifespan to see that, but it's not impossible. And I'm really looking forward to us showing some leadership. I think that's the whole key here. China responded when we came out with these EPA changes. That's what it's going to take for the world to wake up. For some reason, it seems like we think we've gotten away with something. I mean, gosh, here we're at 400 parts per million. We got away with it. Whew, wow. The problem is it stays there for a long, long time, persistent. And the other feedback loops that come in with that, we absolutely have to start reducing something. And even though this is a modest step, it's a step. And Montana seems to be in the limelight quite a bit because of the coal exports to China that are proposed in new coal mines in Otter Creek. And then, of course, we have our coal strip plant. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times testimony gets given verbally, but you really have to see these places to see what you're looking at. You have to see coal strip. You have to see the ash ponds. And with that in mind, we made a movie to do just that. I'm going to go back to Pittsburgh next Friday for the EPA hearing. I don't know why I picked Pittsburgh. I've never been there, I guess. Someone else mentioned they're going to go to Washington, D.C. I can imagine the reception in Pittsburgh. The only thing we have in common is that I'm an ex-miner, copper miner. My family was a mining family. My grandfather died from consumption because of working in the mines at mid-40s. This is a common thing in our family going way back to Cornwall. So I have that common thing. The other thing that I think, and I know Pennsylvania is full of sportsmen, and I think that's a key thing here. We have to get to the sportsmen in this country to get our message across here, because look at Montana. Here we are. We're blessed with all this sun, the wind, waterways. On the other hand, we got all this coal. And when you hear people bragging about how much coal they have, wow, what are you bragging about? You know, it's a problematic asset, if it's an asset at all, because we're not folding in the costs related to the burning of the coal. Coal did a great job of, coal's an example of sequestration of carbon. And now we're talking about carbon sequestration. Again, recycled sequestration. And a lot of this stuff's going to have to be left in the ground. I'm sorry. But leadership, I sure hope we're going to get there. And it's too bad we have to be heroic like Gina McCarthy to be a decent human being.
Hank Stein is next. On deck is John Woodard.
Hi, I'm Hank Stein, S-T-E-I-N, and I live in Missoula, and I just graduated from the University of Montana with you guys. But I graduated with a degree in ecological restoration, and there's a couple of really important things I learned from my degree program. The first one is that I have very good job security. In Montana, all you have to do is drive east, and you drive along hundreds of miles of Superfund sites, all the way up to the Berkeley pit. So I'm not worried about my jobs. There are plenty of places to restore, and so we can leave it at that. And the second thing I've learned is that it's a lot easier to prevent degradation than it is to restore it. It costs way more effort, and it's just not necessary. So that is why I'm here to support the EPA's proposal to reduce pollution from power plants, because I don't need more work, and I think we can do better. And then I suppose the last reason is, in Montana, it gets pretty cold in the winter, and the best thing about eating ice cream when it's cold out is that it doesn't melt on your hands. So keep my hands from getting all sticky and keep this place beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hank. John Woodard is up here. Next is Nancy Sedlin.
My name's John Woodland, W-O-O-D-L-A-N-D. I'm here to speak in favor of the EPA regulations, give testimony in favor of these regulations with one giant caveat, and that is that I do not believe the standards are high enough, and I do not believe the time frame is short enough. The senator spoke earlier about the different issues in sitting around her office, and this one rising to the top. Well, this issue will prevent us from dealing with and will impact just about every issue you can think of. If your big issue is world peace, there are already massive human migrations occurring as a result of drought in other parts of the world, and as the sea level comes up, there's going to be more of that, and when you have people from different places trying to occupy the same ground, you end up with wars, and some of the wars we're seeing today are probably a result of climate change, or at least impacted by it. If you care about poverty, all you have to do is look at the impact that we're going to see on food costs in this country as a result of the drought in California, where much of our food comes from. If you care about the United States being a technological leader in the world and the result on our economy for that, all you have to do is look at what's happening in other countries where they're working hard on alternate energy sources and we're not, and we're going to be left behind if we don't work harder. If you care about the environment, we've heard a lot of testimony already about what's happening. If you care about wildlife, there's a lot of wildlife being displaced and being driven extinct as their habitat changes faster than they can change. I could probably go on all night. It doesn't matter about Social Security. If you care about Social Security and maintaining it, the money that's going to be sucked out of our budgets to deal with the damage and repair the damage from the extreme weather that we're facing is going to make it real hard to keep the money in the budget for Social Security. Same thing for health issues. If you care about providing health care, again, this issue is going to suck the life out of just about everything. It's got to be dealt with. It's something that we really, really have to put a major effort towards. And that's my issue, that's my concern, those are my thoughts on the subject. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Nancy Selden, might want to spell that one. It's a little tricky here. Is next. Tim Ledecky, another maybe tricky one, spell that for Jennifer, is on deck. Nancy? Maybe Nancy stepped out here. Tim? All right, appreciate it.
Well, I came along and put myself in the lion's den. So, my name's Tim Ledecky. I'm president of the International Boilermakers, Local 11, Helen, Montana. And I believe in clean air and healthful atmosphere. I also work in power plants. But there's a lot of misdirection in this, but I mean, if we're going to do something about getting rid of the carbon dioxide problem, it's going to have to be an international thing, international investment, an investment by our government akin to the space program, because countries like India and China and other developing nations around the world, they're not going to stop burning coal, and they're going to get it from somewhere. It might not be from here. So, anyways, my name's Tim Ledecky. I'm going to read this statement. We're here today because our members are concerned about the loss of their jobs due to the EPA's proposed Clean Power Plan. The EPA reports reduction of CO2 emissions under the Clean Power Plan is equivalent to a 30% cut from 2005 emissions. However, EPA's proposal gives no credit to states that already have reduced their CO2 emissions due to market-driven forces such as increased natural gas use, the retirement of older coal-generating plants, and construction of new nuclear generation. And I know nobody here wants to see any more nuclear generation. Since 2005, CO2 emissions from all fossil-fueled plants have decreased by 13%. Many states highly dependent on coal-based generation have already achieved significant emission reductions, but still face the additional burden of further reducing their CO2 emissions on a short timetable set by EPA's proposed rule. We recognize that states will have flexibility in developing the measures to achieve the CO2 emission reduction goals called for by the Clean Power Plan. However, the stringency of state reduction goals will nonetheless have the effect of dictating for the first time how states regulate the generation and use of energy. EPA projects that the proposed CO2 reductions would reduce U.S. coal production for electric generation by 35% from 2009 levels by the year 2020, with a comparable reduction of coal-based electric generation. Even larger regional coal production reductions are projected by 2020 for Appalachia, a 63% reduction, and the West, a 47% reduction. EPA also projects that this rule will cause the loss of 41 to 49 gigawatts of coal generating capacity by 2020. These retirements are in addition to the 92 gigawatts of coal capacity that EPA is already projecting will shut down between 2012 and 2020 due in large part to compliance with the 2012 mercury and air toxics rule. We believe that losing around 130 gigawatts of base load coal capacity, nearly 40% of the nation's coal generation fleet in 2012, raises serious concerns about the future reliability of our electric power supplies. Our reliability concerns will no doubt become even more urgent as existing baseload nuclear units begin to retire upon the expiration of their already extended NRC operating licenses. Our preliminary estimates of the job impacts of EPA's proposed Clean Power Rule indicate the potential loss of 52,000 permanent direct jobs by 2020 in the utility, rail, and coal sectors due to power plant retirements, and a loss of 167,000 total direct and indirect jobs. These direct jobs are all highly skilled, high-paying jobs, typically in rural communities without opportunities for comparable employment. These impacts do not consider any of the job losses associated with the closure of plants due to the mercury air rule, the MATS rule, and other factors. EPA's proposal for increasing the dispatch of natural gas combined cycle units, in addition to the 40 gigawatts of new natural gas combined cycle capacity that EPA projects to come online from 2020 to 2030, will lead to significant increases in natural gas prices well above EPA's projections. These price increases will be further amplified by liquid natural gas exports. Independent analysts project that utility gas demand may rise threefold above EPA's forecast. Consumers and energy-intensive industries will bear the brunt of these gas price increases. In 99, 2000, and 2001, I was working in southern Nevada on these combined cycle natural gas-fired power plants outside of Las Vegas, and their sole principal purpose was to provide electricity to California. Somebody tried to corner the natural gas market, and they had to shut the construction of those plants down for about 3 years because of the fluctuation in natural gas prices. And if we have any more winters like last winter, you'll see the prices increase even more. In fact, there was shortages. We have several recommendations about revisions to the Clean Power Plan. 1, the plan should provide states with credit for prior CO2 reductions as an option towards meeting a reasonable national target for reducing CO2 emissions from the electric power sector. 2, EPA's compliance timetable is unrealistic and unachievable, even with multi-year compliance averaging toward interim and final targets. The initial reduction program should be delayed by several years to allow states and affected sources adequate time to prepare and submit state plans, and to structure and implement compliance strategies in the most flexible, least cost manner. EPA's proposals for major expansions of state energy efficiency and renewable energy programs interfere with traditional state authority and energy planning and appear to be well beyond the agency's authority under the Clean Air Act. Supreme Court's recent decision on greenhouse gas permitting rule contains strong cautionary language that the court will take a skeptical view of an overly expansive interpretation of EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases. We believe that the agency should reconsider the proposed rules building block approach to set state CO2 emissions reduction goals based on end-use energy efficiency, increased use of natural gas and renewable energy, as well as other beyond-the-fence emission reduction strategies. Rather, we urge EPA to focus the rule only on options for reducing emissions within the plant fence line. Proposed 6% efficiency improvement for existing coal units is a step in the right direction, but we are doubtful that all these investments would ever be made given the rule's negative impact on coal generation and new source review permitting constraints. Finally, we believe that the rule is premature since we do not know the extent to which other nations, particularly large developing countries, will be willing to commit to a truly global program of greenhouse gas reductions. We cannot go it alone and expect our actions will have any meaningful climate impact in a world economy that is using more coal and other fossil fuels every day. Developing nations already emit more CO2 than advanced industrial nations, and the Department of Energy projects that their share of global emissions will grow steadily. And I could read a statement from our president, but you have time constraints.
Up next is Ross Prosperi, and on deck is Steve Loken. We only have a couple left here. Feel free to sign up if you want to say a few words. We've got some time here. And also for those that don't want to speak here, make sure you sign a postcard on the way out here and hand it to Peter. Ross.
Thank you, David. Ross Prosperi, that's Prosperi. With Montana Conservation Voters, we've been working to elect candidates to office for 15 years. This is our 15th year anniversary in support of addressing climate change. You know, folks that are going to stand up for passing good policy for renewable energy, energy efficiency, and protecting Montana's outdoor recreation industry, which is the lifeblood of our economy here. And so we are obviously in strong support and applaud the EPA and our president's efforts to address and curtail our CO2 emissions. And I've been going door to door as their field director for 8 years now, around the state of Montana, knocking 10 to 15,000 doors on this issue. And it's I've personally witnessed basically the public perception changing on this issue over the years. I mean, we've been doing our clean energy campaign where we actually knock doors not for candidates but just strictly on the issue. And we ask folks to support with contributions, and it has been a sustainable project and program, and it's been a pleasure to see that change, because I certainly know if we're not getting out there and talking to the public about this issue, perception on this issue will continue to wither and crack like paint on a house. So again, applaud our administration's efforts to do something on this issue, because we're in the business of getting elected officials in the office that are going to take on this issue and address some of the very difficult challenges we're facing right now. Thank you.
Steve Loken.
My name's Steve Loken. I own a construction company here in Missoula called Loken Builders, and I've dedicated my working life to conservation. And I first saw Libby Dam being constructed, and 90 miles of the Kootenai River flooded out for a reservoir. And when you see a river give itself up for renewable energy up there, it broke my heart. And I thought the only solution was, instead of creating more and more energy, whether it's coal or renewable or wind, that if I dedicated what I did with my hands to reducing the consumption of energy, we'd all be a lot better off. So while the quest and call now is for more renewables, I would like to propose a couple of other things. We need to figure out how to compel power companies to incentivize conservation, to take existing housing stock, which is about a third of the energy consumption in the United States, a third of the housing stock, and make it more efficient. It's already there. It's already heating the neighborhoods instead of heating the houses. So if we could conserve, it's not sexy, I know, because wind is a lot more sexy, but if we could conserve, think how much less energy we'd be producing by coal, by wind, by solar. So somehow, if EPA could come around to recognizing that this is the number one call, finding ways of using less of everything, but in the energy world, it's a big deal, and it's so much cheaper. The Power Planning Council made this commitment 28 years ago and found out that conservation incentives in the Pacific Northwest for existing housing stock and new was by far the cheapest way of producing power in the Pacific Northwest. We still lead the nation in terms of less consumption per capita than any other region in the United States. And it worked. It saved a lot of money. So the other thing I'd like to do, by the way, I was appointed to be on the governor's climate change task force 3 years ago. We served a two-year term, and through all sectors of Montana economy, transportation, agriculture, housing, industry, we found 435 ways of reducing energy consumption in all these sectors. The governor adopted 7 of them, and the legislature, I think, approved 2 of them. All of these are on the website. They're all very thoughtfully done by a group of experts and all of us from all sectors of Montana to find ways of reducing energy consumption in the state of Montana so that we wouldn't have to be reliant on coal, wind, or solar, but just use less of everything. Those advisory findings are still compelling, they're still honest, and they will still work. They will still save a lot of money. So instead of reinventing the wheel, look at those advice elements to try to find ways of reducing consumption. Also, I find it's interesting is we will not be able to get off coal immediately, so if we could find ways of increasing combustion efficiency in existing coal plants, it's only 31% efficient now, it's ridiculous. If we could find ways of reintroducing magnetohydrodynamics and other research to take the older plants offline and make the existing ones much more efficient, it'd be a good way to start the transition as we all move towards consuming less energy. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Suzette, I'm going to butcher your name here, is next. Descalt? Even close?
Yeah, you're close.
Spell it for Jennifer, please.
Actually, it's Dussault.
Okay.
Yeah, good call, though. My name is Suzette Dussault, and it's Dussault. And I wasn't prepared to speak tonight, so I don't have any prepared notes. But I'm going to speak from my heart because this has been an issue for me for many, many, many years. It's almost deja vu. I don't remember when the deregulation debacle happened in the Montana State Legislature, but we were in the room across the hall pleading with our state legislators to please not approve deregulation. So anyway, so this has been a long time coming, and I don't know if the gentleman from the Boilermakers Union is still here. Yeah, I'm sorry that he did, because I have been a lifelong union member ever since for my adult life. I support trade unions. I believe that they are vital to our economic well-being. They're essential for justice in the workplace. They're essential for the employment fairness in Montana. And we have a history of unjust labor practices in Montana for years. So I'm sorry. It also has been an issue that has come up many, many times where they divide the unions versus the environmentalists. We've seen it in the labor, or I mean in the environmental movement against the timber workers, and now we're seeing it against jobs versus environment in the labor union. And it's unfortunate because I think he has more friends in this room than he realizes. He is not in alien territory because we all want good paying jobs. And I believe that we need to move from a resource-based using natural gas or coal or even lumber or nuclear for energy production. It's archaic. It is not doing our planet any good. It is not doing our communities any good, as we're seeing the flood from the rural communities when drought affects a community and there are no more, the farms cannot sustain the drought situations. So I would love to see a more investment. We know that no one owns the wind, no one owns the sun, no one owns the water, no one owns the geothermal ability between under our land in Montana. And I believe that those are the resources that need to be developed, not to sustain not to ship wind energy down to the Sun Belt, which to me is just a nonsensical idea, why we are sending wind through transmission lines across our beautiful state, but simply to develop local energy efficiencies and sources. So thank you.
We have one more speaker lined up here. Before I announce her too, I just wanted a couple of VIP visitors here from Senator Tester's office. We've got Deb Franson. And from Senator Walsh's office, we've got Catherine Benz. So appreciate you guys coming down. And the last speaker we have here, once again, if you want to speak, we've got some time here before the library's going to kick us out. Carol Marsh wants to say a few words.
This is going to be a bit of a different subject, but it'll be short. I would really urge you all to go online and check out Pear Energy, P-E-A-R, piece of fruit, energy. I've been a customer of Pear Energy for months now, and so all of the money that I spend on energy goes to clean, renewable sources. I can't explain exactly how this works. I don't even understand exactly how this works, but they explain it. And if you call them, you will get actually a human being answering the phone, and they can also explain it. So just, I would urge you to check it out. And also, again, a different subject, but if you missed NPR yesterday morning, they said that there's a government plan to turn parts of Montana, Wyoming, and Nevada into a bombing range, a bombing practice range. This isn't going to help our situation at all.
Want to thank everybody for coming. Lots of good comments, a little bit of excitement there as well here. For those that didn't sign cards, postcards here, we'll collect those here. Peter will collect those cards and we'll make sure those get to the EPA. Grab some muffins, cookies, drinks, whatever. They're there for the taking. They were bought for this meeting. One more speaker? Yeah. All right, excellent, okay.
My name is Jim Roach, that's R-O-A-C-H, and I'm just a citizen, and I just want to thank President Obama and the EPA for the Clean Power Plan. I think it's a good start. It's too bad it has to all fall on regulatory agencies to get this done. Congress, do something. I think we need to elevate this to the national debate. We need to hear from our political candidates on this issue. I don't know. I don't like the all of the above rhetoric, that doesn't deal with the issue. We need to have somebody champion this issue and make it happen. Also, thank you, EPA. I think that we need to consider also regulating the carbon that we're exporting as coal and other energy products. And I think we need to consider the carbon, the embedded carbon in the products that we buy from other countries, and we need to regulate that somehow because that's on us too. So that's what I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for coming here. Oh, they're coming out of the woodwork. Excellent. My name is Tom Beers. I actually came here as a listener, but I thought I'm an attorney, so I ought to say something. Anyway, I'm on a national campaign. I represent one of the lawyers that represent what's called our Children's Trust, and we are actually preparing a writ of certiorari before the U.S. Supreme Court. And our position is that there is a public trust, a national public trust in those natural resources which are necessary for our survival. And thus far we've lost. So we'll see what happens with the Supreme Court. But it's just another way to fight this. And I guess what I also want to say is I've been lucky enough to work with some of the international scientists that climate scientists who have been working on this, and that's been a real privilege for me. And really what it comes down to is I agree with everything that everybody has said here, except for our Boilermaker, that this is a start because it's nowhere near enough to get us down to that 350. Which we have to do, and time is, quite frankly, of the essence. We don't know how much time, but it is of the essence. And so this is a start, and whatever we accomplish here, we can't quit. This, if about our kids, our grandkids, this is something that we will be fighting for many, many years because it's just going to take a long time, and that's because of the inertia of what happens in the earth. Anyway, the other thing Steve Loken testified, and his statements are correct, that this is a start, and conservation has to be a major part of what we do. Technology has to be a major part of what we do, and it's a combination of things. So, kind of 3 cheers for the president. He was forced to do this on his own, but as we are all here, it's a grassroots situation. We have to figure out the ways to convince more and more people that we have to move on this. And Abraham Lincoln said that if you don't have the grassroots, you're never going to win. So that's what we have to do, is by having these kinds of things, talking to our friends, talking to our neighbors, we can do that. Thank you. Oh, how did I miss Claudia Brown? I'm sorry. Claudia Brown is another speaker, somehow got lost in the system here. I apologize, Claudia. Geez. We'd planned on you going pretty early, so.
This is spontaneous. I think it's I'm Claudia Brown. I think it's very important to flood the PSC, the Public Service Commission, with letters and emails. They need to get on board with what's happening. They have put conditions on alternative energies that they have not put on the fossil fuel energies. And they've even been reprimanded for doing that. So flood the PSC with your emails and letters. Thank you.
Scanning. Have a good night, folks. Thank you for coming. Once again, if you didn't get a chance to sign a postcard, make sure you get one signed here and hand her to Pete.